I've seen people post online something along the lines of, you don't buy a Leica with your head, you buy a Leica with your heart. And I think that for the most part, this is very true because, let's admit it, for the price of a brand new Leica body, you can most likely go to another manufacturer and pick up a new professional body and lens, if not more. And this setup is very well more capable in terms of specs than any Leica could give you. Buying a film Leica is an even more insane notion for very apparent reasons, but today there are still 3 current bodies that are still in production: the Leica MA, the MP, and of course the M7. Each of these bodies will run you $4,550 body only. Again, this is completely insane. $4,550 for a film body. So why even buy a Leica M7? Well, hopefully by the end of this video I can help justify your purchase, maybe just a little bit. So why did I pick the M7 over the MA or the MP? To me, the MA is essentially an M3. It's fully mechanical, no light meter, no batteries required, just pick up and go. The MP is essentially an M6. It's mechanical perfection, meaning it's better engineered and better machined, so it's more or less prone to breaking. But at the end of the day, to me, it's just an M6, and I would rather pay half the price for a new M6 than an MP. So I am left with the M7. And to me, the M7 is the only body in the Film M line that really stands out. The M7 brings more electronics and more technology into the body. If you want to get down to it, the main reason why you would want to buy an M7 over the MA or the MP is that the M7 has aperture priority. So is aperture priority critical or a must-have in a body? Absolutely not. Me personally, I rarely get out of manual mode because that's just a habit that I've built up over the years. But the way that I think of it as, if I'm going to pay over $4,550 for a body, I would rather pay for a body that has aperture priority for the same price rather than a body that does not. That being said though, because the M7 is so reliant on technology and batteries and electronics, you could say that in the long run, this is more prone to breaking down. Now, this is not a problem that I'm very worried about right now, but if one day in the future Leica decides to stop manufacturing or repairing this body or just any film bodies in general, this will become a very expensive brick. And like I said, the M7 will be the first to break down in theory. With the M7, you're also getting a flash sync speed of up to 1/1000th of a second if you use Leica Met's flashes. Along with this, you also get an upgraded viewfinder. The M7 viewfinder displays your shutter speed, film speed, exposure mode, and flash readiness. The viewfinder information brightness is also automatically adjusted to match the ambient light conditions. The M7 can now automatically recognize film speeds through DX film coding and provides aperture priority auto exposure. Although the M7 runs on 2 batteries, when those run out, you can still manually fire at 1/60th and 1/25th of a second. Before buying the M7, I was actually going between this body, the Contax G2, and the Konica Hexar RF. All 3 great bodies in their own right. The Contax G2, if I'm not mistaken, is the only film rangefinder that has autofocus. It also has a lot of other features that makes it a lot more advanced in terms of specs than the M7. The Konica Hexar RF is essentially an M7 with even more features. The Hexar and the G2 can both shoot up to 1/4000th of a second, and to me that's the big advantage of those 2 bodies versus this one. I didn't really care about the autofocus so much. It's the 4/1000th of a second shutter speed. And if you think about it, in ISO 100 on a bright sunny day, you're talking about a 2-stop shutter speed difference. So it's the difference between shooting at 5.6 and 2.8. So that is a huge difference, and that could really make or break a photo. But like I said, you don't really buy a Leica with your head, you buy it with your heart. Even though the other 2 cameras are technically more advanced and better in use, we have the M7. So let's just talk about a few different aspects of this camera that I've noticed since owning it. First off, I absolutely love the shutter on this camera. It is quite possibly the quietest shutter I've ever heard, minus using electronic shutters on my mirrorless camera. So let's just turn the camera on and show you what I'm talking about. This is 1/1000th of a second. Absolutely quiet. It's just a quiet little click. Get the mic right up next to it. And that's it. Like I said, this is very possibly the quietest shutter I've ever heard, and it's a lot different from using something like the F3 over here. So just absolutely amazing. Now this next thing may seem trivial, but I think it adds a lot of value to me on this camera. If you own an M6, you know that there's really no on-off button on your camera. To turn your camera off, you actually have to turn it into bulb mode. And I have to admit that I've left my camera running maybe overnight just because I've got to turn it to bulb mode. On this camera, there is a physical on-off button. There's a little red dot up here. If the red dot is showing, your camera's off, and if it's not, your camera's on. It's very much like the Nikon F3 if you have experience with that, except it's kind of reversed. On this one, if the red dot is showing, it means your camera is off, whereas on the Nikon, red dot means your camera is on. Overall, I really don't have a lot of problems with this camera. One thing that I would say that is annoying is that if your camera is off and you want to turn it on and take a photo right away, that's only possible in manual mode. If you have it in auto exposure or in aperture priority, if you turn the camera on, inside the viewfinder, it will actually show you your DX film speed, and it will flash for approximately 2 seconds, and during this 2 seconds, you cannot take any photos. And that's just kind of a weird little feature that they implemented on this camera, and it's only in aperture priority. One thing that I was really interested in about this camera is this back panel 2-in-1 button dial that lets you both control your exposure compensation and your ISO film speed. As you can see, the inner dial actually moves independently, and really you can just turn it anywhere you want, set it to DX reading or just your manual film speeds. If you want to change your exposure comp, you have to press this button down and twist the dial. So it's not much like the M6 where the center button actually moves. This one doesn't move at all, it just spins. And this one, I would say, like on my particular M7, it's a little bit stiff, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. This next thing is really for those who are going to Leicas and rangefinder cameras for the first time. And for me, as somebody who uses SLR, coming from an SLR background, when I hold the camera in landscape mode, I hold it like this. And when I'm in portrait mode, I usually turn the camera this way to change my aperture and manually focus. So if you didn't know, on rangefinders, or at least on Leicas, you look, this is where you see the viewfinder. You look through this hole and you see through this window. So if you have anything blocking it, you obviously can't see anything. So for me, I'll say that this is more of my personal problem. For other users, or if you used the camera for a long time, I'm sure you get used to it. But you can't really cover it up to really like hold the manual focus or the aperture ring with 2 hands, because obviously it'll just completely cover everything. So you kind of have to just find a way around it. And that's just really one thing that annoys me about these Leica rangefinder cameras in general. At the end of the day, the Leica M7 is an amazing camera, but is it worth the $4,550 price tag? To me, it is absolutely not worth it, because realistically, this camera would do the same thing as a $100 film camera. As long as both camera works, you're pretty much taking the same picture because you're using the same film. The main thing that's going to determine your image quality is the lens, so if anything, you should be putting your money into the lens, not the body. But if you're interested in using Leica glass, I mean, like, there are other camera bodies that use the Leica M mount, so you can always buy the Leica lenses and adapt it to another body. So that's one thing to think about. I would probably say that a logical person doesn't buy a Leica because they think that it's the best camera or it has the best features in the world. You really buy a Leica because of the heritage, for the sense of owning a Leica, and I think that's okay. As long as this camera gets you out and shooting, why not? If you have the money to buy this body or any other Leica, why not do it? I mean, if it makes you happy and it gets you shooting, just do it. Like I said, you don't buy a Leica with your head, you buy a Leica with your heart. And when you have your heart set out on a Leica, really nothing fills that void. I've gone through a lot of cameras back and forth, like, should I buy a Leica? No, it costs too much. But in the end, I always end up buying, I bought the M6, now I bought the M7, just because every other film camera really just doesn't fill that void when you want a Leica. If you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, share it, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.